Welcome back, everybody. In the last tutorial, we looked at, we went ahead and got our images and we created buttons for each one of our images. And we started kind of doing the initial layout on the screen, as you can see here. One of the problems that we would run into, though, is that we don't know what our end user is going to be using. We don't know if they're going to be using, what type of screen resolution they'll be using for their, if they're using iPhone, or we haven't gotten Android development yet, but this is true for Android as well. We don't know what the size of their screen was going to be. They could be using a tablet, they could be using a phone. We're not sure. So to kind of demonstrate this, if we laid this screen out, and right now it says iPhone tall 2.3 here at the top. If we move this down and we test it, let's say we want to do the iPhone tall, because we're just going to look at the tall because that is the portrait version or the vertical version. So we're not really going to look at the wide, but let's hit the iPad tall and see what happens. See, it moves it a bit, right? So we can go back to iPhone tall and everything looks good, and then we can go to iPhone 5 tall. You see it kind of cuts things off there. Do the same thing for this one, and it totally is messed up, right? And this depends on how we've set up these images. Let's go back to where it looked okay. Okay, back to iPhone tall 2.3. So there's some things we can do to kind of combat this, and this is where the content size fitter comes in, and the layout groups and layout element components come in. So after this tutorial, we should be able to lay them all out, and then no matter what our screen is, it will fit everything for the screen, so nothing is ever kind of out of place or out of whack, right? So hopefully you've got something that looks very similar to what we have here on the screen, and so let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to main panel, and we're going to go over here to our inspector. Make sure you have main panel highlighted here in the hierarchy. Go over to your inspector, hit add component, and we're going to put content size fitter, and if you see it starts kind of popping up, we're going to put that there. I'm going to leave this on unconstrained for now. And then what we want to do is we want to have these three, mainly we're really concerned about these three big images that are our buttons, right? So we're going to create a holder for these. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on main panel. We're going to go down to, we're going to create an empty game object, and we're going to call this game, you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine, home underscore screen elements. Okay. It'd be good if I spelled it properly. There we go. Nope. Elements, home screen elements. We're going to enter. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the top button, middle button, and bottom button. And I'm going to move those down into my home screen elements. Okay. All right, so the cool thing about that is if I got them home screen elements, I can click on home screen elements right there, and then I can move this guy around, right? But we're going to move it back. So now what we want to do is we want to make this home screen elements game object, and we're going to make it a layout group, okay? So we're going to add component over here. Make sure you have home screen elements highlighted. Go to add component, and we're going to start typing in layout. And it should come up with a couple of options already. Since this is all vertical, we're going to do the vertical layout group. And don't worry if it kind of puts everything kind of weird. We're going to unclick everything, and we want to do width, and we're going to do height. Now we're going to do this. We're going to make this the height and the width of my screen. See what I'm doing here? Make sure you go all the way to the edge. Perfect. And now, now that you have that, if you notice that our hamburger button and our TED button are both gone, that's because I'm going to reiterate this in the hierarchy. These things are drawn in order. So the hamburger button's still there. It's just behind these things. So because what's happening in the computer is drawing your canvas first, then it draws the main panel, it draws the hamburger button, draws the TEDx button, and so forth. So you make sure that these are always on top. You're just going to kind of click these, and you're going to move them down below. And make sure they're not a child, right? You don't want them to be a child of that. So we can even move them below the event system there. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to collapse this and then move them. You still want them to be a part of the main panel, but you want them to be there. So there we go. So they're in the main panel, they're not part of the home screen elements, and they're here, and you can see them down at the bottom. So the next thing you want to do, you probably want to resize it, and we're going to bring it up to the top here. Okay, and we can resize this so it's a little bit, there we go. And then we'll bring our hamburger button. We're going to make sure we size that properly too, like so. And then we're going to bring that up to the top so we can use that for later. And we can always mess with the size for that later. Okay, so back to this. So now we have the vertical layout group on there. And the child alignment, we have it at the upper left. We can change this to middle center. I'll leave it at upper left for now. And then now we have to take these three and we have to add one more thing. So we're going to highlight top button. I'm holding down my shift, and then we're going to hit bottom button. We want all three of these highlighted. And then we're going to go over here to the right to the inspector. We're going to add component, and it's already there. I'm going to start from fresh. We're going to start typing out layout. You're looking for layout element. It's right here. We're going to click that and just leave that as is for now. Okay. So now the cool thing about this is that we can test this now. We can go over here and we can do iPad tall. But wait, it still isn't doing it all the way, right? So one more thing we have to do. We'll go back to iPad tall. And we're going to make sure that these stretch. So now we can test out each one like I'm doing. Oh, that's a wide one. You don't want that one. And it stretches it. So right now we're really just concentrated on those three buttons, and we want them to always stretch properly. And you just want to test each one to make sure that you don't have any of that blue background bleed through there. And I think I have it a little bit on the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double check. So I'll go back to what were initially the iPhone tall, and I'm just going to click on each one and make sure that we have it. Well, actually the home screen, we're going to make sure this is all the way. You see where that kind of turns blue? You want to make sure that that is all the way to that. Again, I hit the home screen elements, and I'm just make sure have that stretched as much as I can. Now, for some of your images, this may not work. As you see, this is stretching it, right? So you just want to make sure that you've tested each one of these. And so maybe you don't want your image to be that distorted. If we go up to iPhone tall here, it kind of can distort depending on which one. So just go through and make sure it's not distorting it too much. If it is, you might want to make some adjustments to your initial image. But I think this is okay. This will work. So no matter what device you're on, all these buttons will be presented. They're not going to overlap each other. They're not going to be cut off. So I think this will work pretty well. Now, if you noticed, we have our hamburger button up here, and we also have a TEDx button. Now, depending on the screen, that TEDx button can get cut off, like here, right? So let's address that. Let's go to our hamburger button. We already have the anchor to the top left, which is nice. We always want it to be at the top left. TEDx button, it says this is at the top left too, but we want to change that. We want that to be, so I'm going to hit the anchor button here, and we're going to hit the top right. Let's do that. Now let's see if that helps us out. Yeah, looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. And again, this is how you do like kind of a cheap test to see. Not too bad. Not too bad. And we can address this changing too. If you don't want the image size to change, you can also do a couple of things. You can the TEDx button, and you can preserve aspect ratio if you want, and that should keep it the same if you like that. So I might keep the aspect ratio there for that. And I'm going to move my button. I'm going to just kind of make it smaller, and I'm going to move it over a bit. Okay, cool. So now no matter what screen we're on, we know that this screen's layout is going to be the same. These buttons will be in the same order. We're going to have the TEDx button always up to the right. We're going to have the hamburger button always up to the left. And each one of these buttons will always be where they should be, just by doing those few simple steps. And you can play around with the content size fitter. I'll put a link down in the description and on the website, depending on where you're looking at this. And I'll give you a link to that goes more in depth on these 3 content size fitters and these 3 elements. And you can play with them. You can use these in any panel that you have if you always want these to be in the same order with the same spacing. Something else I'll show you. You can go to the home screen elements here. We put in the vertical layout group, and the cool thing about this is you can play with these different options and you can pad things, the spacing. So if I increase spacing, see what happens. It gives me more spacing between my buttons. It's kind of cool. You can even go back and forth. We're going to reset that back to 0 because we want them to be just like that, right? So that's a good option. You can change the child alignment, but you can play with this on your own and see how you like it, right? So that's the content size fitter, and that's one of the tools that we have to make these buttons be the same no matter where we're viewing them, right? Not only do we use the content size fitter, but we did use our anchor and we're stretching it. You may not want to stretch it, but for purposes of this, I don't mind that it's being stretched. So we can go back to our container here. And so you don't have to go off each single one and make it stretch. You can just go to the parent container, because whatever changes you make to the parent, it actually gets absorbed by the child object, right? So here I told it I wanted it to stretch. So just in contrast, we can do things like always have it be in the center. Let's see what happens if we always make it in the center. See, for that one, it didn't stretch it. It kept it in the center because we had a bigger screen, right? So let's go back to the original one. This is the iPhone Tall 2.3. We're going to change this back to stretch. And just to make sure that went through, we can go through and try each screen, and it did. Cool. All right. So that was a very short tutorial, guys. But if this is something that we're going to use throughout on each screen. So yeah, so get comfortable with it, maybe play with it a little bit, and so you'll start kind of figuring it out on your own if this is something you'd like to use or not. All right. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. We're going to start. We're going to go ahead and save the screen. We're going to add a new panel, and we're going to start putting functionality to these buttons, and we're going to start switching between screens. Okay, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.